Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on a structure that is, well, it's just so central to everything you do, from walking across a room to uh, formulating a complex thought. We're talking about the cerebellum.
And our mission today is a bit of a challenge. We're working with one of the most, anatomically dense chapters in the book. The cerebellum is visually complex, but we want to translate all that into a clear narrative you can actually visualize.
So you can build a mental map of its lobes and its layers and connections without ever needing to look at a diagram.
Exactly.
And that structural density, that's really the key paradox of the cerebellum, isn't it? It's the largest part of the hindbrain, sure, but it only accounts for about a tenth of the cerebrum's weight.
Right, but here's the staggering part. Despite that smaller size, it holds approximately 70% of the entire central nervous system's 100 billion neurons.
70%.
70%. And the vast majority of those are those tiny, tiny granule cells just packed into its cortex.
That one statistic just completely changes how you think about it. It explains why its old reputation, which, goes way back to Herophilus and Galen as being just about movement, is so incomplete.
So outdated. I mean, what's fascinating is how our understanding has evolved. The cerebellum's role is so much grander than simple movement. It's really the ultimate neuroeditor.
The neuroeditor, I like that.
Its core job is optimization. It modulates both motor and, crucially, non-motor behavior to refine and perfect performance.
So it's all about precision. It doesn't start the action, but it perfects it.
Precisely. It performs what some researchers call the universal cerebellar transform. The same fundamental computation, whether it's fine-tuning the timing of a muscle or sharpening an abstract thought.
Okay, let's start with that basic architecture. If you could, say, peel back that highly convoluted outer layer, you'd find a superficial cortex covering a core of white matter.
And embedded right inside that white matter, you find the functional centers, the four deep cerebellar nuclei. These are just, they're aggregations of neuronal cell bodies.
And they are critical.
Absolutely essential. Because they are the only output centers for almost all the information leaving the cerebellum. It's where the cortex sends its final word.
And we name these moving from the midline, from the medial aspect outward, right?
That's right. So closest to the midline is the fastigial nucleus. Then moving laterally, you get the two interposed nuclei.
The globose and the emboliform.
Right, sometimes called the posterior and anterior interposed.
And then you hit the big one.
The dentate nucleus. It is the most lateral and, the largest nucleus. It's the one that has expanded most dramatically throughout evolution, which tells you a lot.
This is where the visualization gets really interesting. Anatomically, the dentate nucleus is often described as looking like a crumpled leather purse with a ruffled edge.
It's a great analogy. And its opening, the hilum, points medially toward the midline.
And if we look inside that crumpled purse, we find the proof of that non-motor function we mentioned.
Exactly. The dentate has two key parts: a narrow, large-celled region up front, and then a much wider, smaller-celled region in the back. This expanded back part, the macrogeric region, is thought to correlate directly with the huge expansion of our cognitive areas in the cerebral cortex.
So the structure of this output center literally maps onto the intellectual complexity of the rest of the brain. It's not just random geometry.
Not at all. It's a functional indicator. It shows us that the brain invested massive resources in refining and optimizing our higher order functions, not just our movements.
All right, let's move from the inside out to the external shape and landmarks. The whole thing sits in the posterior cranial fossa, right underneath the tentorium cerebelli.
That thick dural fold that separates it from the cerebrum above. And it's tucked right behind the pons and medulla, with the fourth ventricle separating them.
And structurally, it's two large lateral hemispheres.
United by that central midline structure, the vermis.
Which means worm because it looks a bit like one.
It does. And if you flip it over and look at the inferior surface, you see this deep groove called the vallecula.
Why is the vallecula important to visualize?
Because it's not just a groove. It's the space where the lower brainstem, specifically the medulla, is literally tucked into the cerebellum. It defines that crucial physical relationship.
Okay, so the surface itself is then carved up by these curved transverse fissures into 10 lobules, numbered 1 to 10. Now, we don't need to memorize all 10.
No, but we absolutely need to understand the three major fissures that create the main functional divisions.
Starting with the biggest one.
The primary fissure. It's the deepest and most visible landmark on the superior surface. Just imagine this curving valley. and it clearly marks the boundary between the anterior lobe, which is lobules 1 to V.
And the much larger posterior lobe, which is lobules 6 to IX.
Right.
Okay, so the second major division is the horizontal fissure.
This one is also very prominent. It runs around the dorsolateral border of each hemisphere, basically separating the top half from the bottom half. And it's really important in the hemispheres where it divides lobule seventh into crust 4 and crust 2-3.
And that crusty and crustua region, that's the part that really ballooned in humans, isn't it?
That is the massive evolutionary expansion. And it correlates almost perfectly with the expansion of our prefrontal cortex. It's our cognitive powerhouse.
So the third and final key fissure is the posterolateral fissure. This one sounds a bit more hidden.
It is. It's deep down in caudal, separating lobule IX from lobule X. And what that does is define the flocculonodular lobe,
Which is the oldest part of the cerebellum.
the most ancient part. It's made of the midline nodulus, which is lobule X, and its little hemispheric extension, the flocculus. And these three lobes, anterior, posterior, and flocculonodular, they align perfectly with the major functional roles we see clinically.
So to perform this huge editorial function, the cerebellum needs these massive, high-volume data streams coming in and going out.
Which it gets through the three bilaterally paired fiber tracts, the cerebellar peduncles.
Think of them as the three major fiber optic cables.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Let's start with the inferior cerebellar peduncle.
Okay, so this one runs parallel to the brainstem. And it's actually a composite structure. It has two distinct parts. The outer part is the restiform body, which is almost entirely afferent.
Meaning information in.
Information coming in to the cerebellum. This is where you get key data about body position from the dorsal spinocerebellar tract and, importantly, error signals from the olivocerebellar fibers.
And the medial part.
That's the juxtarestiform body. And it's mostly efferent, so carrying information out. Specifically is carrying Purkinje cell axons that project to the vestibular nuclei to help you maintain your balance.
Okay, so number 2, and the biggest one physically, is the middle cerebellar peduncle. Why is it so massive?
Because it's the main line for the cerebral cortex to talk to the cerebellum. It carries the enormous pontocerebellar mossy fiber pathway. These fibers come from the contralateral pontine nuclei.
Contralateral, so the opposite side.
The opposite side. So they're relaying nearly all the intended movement plans and cognitive plans from the opposite cerebral cortex. It's just a huge data pipe.
And finally, the superior cerebellar peduncle. This sounds like the really important one for its influence.
It is. This is the primary output pathway. All the final, refined messages from the dentate, emboliform, and globose nuclei exit through this route. And critically, it decussates.
It crosses the midline.
It crosses the midline in the caudal midbrain.
And that decussation is everything, because it means the cerebellum is always speaking to the opposite side of the brain.
Exactly. The final, corrected message goes back up to the thalamus and then on to the motor cortex on the opposite side of the body. You get this double crossing. Input from one side of the body crosses to the opposite cortex, which then talks to the cerebellum, which then crosses back to influence that original side. It keeps everything coordinated.
Okay, let's dive into the core processing unit itself. We have that white matter core, which if you see it in a sagittal section, it branches out, creating that beautiful pattern we call the arbor vitae.
The tree of life. And it's called that because it just looks like the branches of a tree. This is the structure that contains all those incoming afferents and all the outgoing efferents from the Purkinje cells.
Now, if we zoom in on the cortex itself, the amazing thing is its uniformity. It's this regular, repeating, almost crystal lattice-like structure across all regions and really all mammals.
It's built to do that one single universal computation we talked about earlier.
So tell us about those 3 layers.
From superficial to deep, you have the sparsely populated molecular layer on top, then the central critical Purkinje cell layer, and then the incredibly dense granule cell layer below.
The Purkinje cell is the star of the show here.
Absolutely. It's the single output cell of the entire cerebellar cortex. And this is key. It is entirely inhibitory. It stops things.
And its shape, its geometry is vital. You have to visualize its dendritic tree not as a messy bush, but as this huge two-dimensional flattened plate or fan.
A fan that is oriented strictly perpendicular to the long axis of the folium, the little leaflet of the cortex. It's set up like a net to catch signals.
And what happens right where the Purkinje cell's axon, its output cable, begins?
That initial segment is controlled by this incredibly precise inhibitory network formed by basket cell axons. It's called the pinso.
The pinso.
Imagine it like a dense, specialized inhibitory sleeve wrapped around the output gate just making sure that the Purkinje cell only sends its no signal when all the computations say it's time.
And that computation is powered by two totally different kinds of input fibers.
They couldn't be more distinct. You have the mossy fibers and the climbing fibers. The mossy fibers are the main information carriers. They're excitatory and they come from all over, like the spinal cord and the pons.
And where do they actually connect with the cortex?
They end in these bulbous structures called rosettes. And they synapse with granule cell dendrites inside these complex little pods called cerebellar glomeruli. That's the first stop where information is filtered.
And then the granule cells take that broad contextual information and spread it across the cortex.
Yes. Their axons go up, they split into what are called parallel fibers, and they run for long distances along the folium, which means they run perpendicularly right through those Purkinje cell dendritic fans.
It's an orthogonal grid. That's the genius of the design.
It's the genius of the lattice, and it allows for massive convergence. A single Purkinje cell can get input from something like 175,000 parallel fibers.
So the mossy fibers are the broad context, the general state of affairs, broadcast widely. Now contrast that with the climbing fibers.
The climbing fibers are the error signal. They're the editor's red pen, and they originate exclusively from one place, the contralateral inferior olive.
And instead of this broad broadcast, they have a very different relationship with the Purkinje cells.
A potent one-to-one relationship. A single climbing fiber finds a single Purkinje cell and just wraps itself around the dendrites, creating 1,000 or more synaptic contacts.
That is an immense amount of power over one single cell.
It is. And this powerful connection is thought to signal errors or unexpected outcomes, which then drives the synaptic changes needed for motor learning. If the mossy fibers provide the context, the climbing fiber says, "You did that wrong. Adjust."
Okay, so we have this uniform computational unit, the cortex, but we know the function is very specific depending on where the inputs and outputs are going. The cerebellum is organized into these parallel vertical modules or zones.
Right, and these zones are defined by which deep nucleus they project to and which climbing fiber input they receive. And if we look at the function, we see this really clear anatomical split emerging, which mirrors the lobes we talked about.
What are the two major functional regions?
First, you have the sensory-motor cerebellum. This is mostly the anterior lobe part of lobule 6 and lobule 8. This is your traditional motor control center.
It gets direct spinal input.
Yes, direct input from the spinal cord, and is linked back and forth with the primary motor and premotor cortices. It handles gait, limb movements, muscle tone, the classics.
And the other side of that coin.
That's the huge cognitive cerebellum. This covers the rest of lobule 6 and all of lobule 7, the IAX, especially those and cruise stress the second expansions we mentioned. And the key here is that this area has no direct spinal input. It's cut off from that.
So what is it connected to?
It's reciprocally linked with the cerebral association areas, the prefrontal cortex, the posterior parietal, the superior temporal cortices. It's modulating higher order planning and language.
So when things go wrong, this functional split explains the clinical triad we see. Let's start with the classic signs of damage to that sensory-motor cerebellum.
You see the cerebellar motor syndrome. This is usually from anterior lobe or vermis lesions, and the hallmark is ataxia.
Lack of coordination.
A lack of order or coordination. This includes dysmetria, which is the inability to judge distance and force, so patients will overshoot or undershoot targets, and also dysarthria, slurred, irregular speech.
Next, damage to the most ancient part, the flocculonodular lobe.
That gives you the vestibulocerebellar syndrome. Since that lord controls equilibrium and eye movements, damage causes severe vertigo, nausea, and eye movement problems like nystagmus. The whole system for stabilizing your gaze fails.
And finally, the more modern syndrome linked to those big cognitive regions.
That is the cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, or CCAS. Lesions in the posterior lobe, encrust there into two, they don't just affect movement. They impair executive functions, planning, spatial skills, and even language, causing disorganized speech.
And it also has an emotional component.
Yes, it includes affective changes, like emotional blunting or disinhibition, which really confirms its profound non-motor role.
So if we connect all this back together, the remarkable truth here is that this one compact structure, with its one repeating lattice-like architecture, performs the same basic computation no matter what data it's getting.
It refines and it corrects for error. It provides the necessary order and timing for pretty much every complex function we have.
So the cerebellum gives us not just motor coordination, but precision across almost every domain. It prevents what has been called dysmetria of thought.
The cognitive equivalent of constantly overshooting or undershooting a target.
It lets us be precise. in our plans, in our language, and in our emotional responses.
Exactly.
So we know that the evolutionarily expanded dentate nucleus is highly interconnected with the prefrontal cortex. And that raises a really important question for you to think about.
Huh.
If the cerebellum is a prediction and correction machine for physical skills, how might the integrity of that same architecture dictate our ability to master or suffer the breakdown of highly complex social behaviors and abstract thoughts that rely on correcting errors in a non-physical space?
A fascinating challenge to consider as you reflect on this incredibly powerful system.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary editor of the nervous system.